I see you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the 63rd Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity. Tonight's award shows take place here in the Lumiere Theatre. We're going to be seeing tonight who takes home the medal in the categories of creative data, innovation, mobile, media and cyber, as well as the young media and young cyber lions. And tonight we'll also see the first of the special awards, this time for Media Person of the Year. Usual rules apply. Doors open at 6:15. Do come early. It does tend to get full. The show is at 7. Don't forget your badge, please. Thank you. Our next session looks to the future. What plans would you put in place if you had the foresight to know where your business, industry or life was heading? Our next speakers will explore the 12 technological forces that will revolutionize the way we buy, work, learn and communicate. You can't afford not to know about these forces, so here to explain where we're all heading, please welcome now to the stage PhD's Worldwide Strategy and Planning Director, Mark Holden.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our session today. It's great to have you here in this really small and intimate little room that isn't in any way intimidating. I want to just make the point, actually, because I'm seeing a few of the faces looking at me. I'm not Kevin Kelly, just in case there's any confusion. He's at the back waiting to come on. I'm a little bit younger than Kevin, although he is arguably more attractive than me. In fact, he's having his makeup applied right now. He's looking pretty good. By the time he comes out, he'll look like Kim Kardashian in about the next 5 minutes. So whilst we wait for him to have his last bits of makeup applied, I want to just say a few ridiculous things and frame the session for you today. First thing I want to do is start with a photograph, a picture of a beautiful landscape garden. Now, depending on how much alcohol you've been drinking, you'll see the symmetry and order that was created by another mind. Now, a dog doesn't see that. Can anyone see the dog in the picture? Just see if you can see the dog. Let me just zoom in for you for a second. There's the dog. So, the dog isn't interested in the symmetry, can't see the symmetry. The dog is interested in one thing only, and that's watering the garden, which is something you wouldn't be doing. You'd be drinking rosé, sitting back, just looking at the garden, right? The dog is adding more value. But crucially, the dog cannot see the higher order of pattern that you can see, because we, in our minds, have 10 billion neurons in our cerebral cortex. The dog only has 160 million. I know that because I looked online. I don't just have these stats in my head, okay? I'm not a complete, utter freak. Now, we have 10 billion neurons in our cortex at the moment, but that is set to change. According to the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Ray Kurzweil, who's currently head of engineering at Google, they think that that is going to change in little over a decade from now. They both believe that computers will shrink to the point that they'll be embedded into our brains, literally injected like liquid into our brains, and allow our minds to connect to the internet. So for the likes of Zuckerberg, that's going to, coming from a social media background, that's going to allow us to share thought. He talks about technology-driven telepathy. And for Google's Kurzweil, obviously, organising the world's information, he wants us just to know anything whenever you want to know it. Now, for me, I can't shake off this thought that what will the seemingly chaotic and random world of everyday reality look like if you have that many more neurons? So think about the difference between the dog and the human. If we are able to connect our minds to the internet and rent additional neurons, which is what they're talking about, non-biological neurons, what additional level of symmetry will we see? And these are the words that are coming out from people that are leading and driving the tech companies that drive change in our industry. Now, if Kurzweil and Google's vision is realised, I think there's a real possibility that it might give us an opportunity to lift our eyes up from the 3 dimensions and peer further into the time dimension. Because effectively, that's what pattern recognisers do. Pattern recognisers, which are neurons, they allow us to see patterns and predict where things will go. So with 100 trillion more neurons, let's imagine if you went to BT or AT&T and you decided to rent for $39.99 a month, you rented an additional 100 trillion neurons from the cloud, what additional symmetry would you see? And if you could see that symmetry, how would it change your waking world? Now, if you have that level of symmetry and you can spot what might happen next, it will naturally and logically mean you're able to predict or much more accurately sense the future, the mid and long-term future. And that is, in essence, exactly what Kevin Kelly has been working on. So Kevin hasn't been creating non-biological neurons, but he has been creating a conceptual framework that allows us to predict. And in my mind, Kevin has created the periodic table of future prediction. He's created this, in his new book, The Inevitable, he's created the 12 fundamental forces that drive change in the world. And he's going to share those with you today. I think, as well as being a fun session today, I think it could also offer some utility. If you have these concepts downloaded into your mind, they act as a sort of a lens through which you can more accurately assess today. If you see new technologies popping up, you can just assess them to see whether or not you think they might actually work or not. And I think it will allow us to much more accurately predict the next moment, predict the future. And that, for me, is a crucial business skill in today's changing world, is to know that next moment ahead of other people. So that's the aim of the session today. The aim of the session is to share with you some of these forces of change, so you can get them into your mind, you can start to use them in some way. So that's it. That's it for me, that's it for the present moment. Let's get to our future, our collective predestination. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in very warmly welcoming the author, genius and doppelganger, Kevin Kelly, to the stage. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was over the top, I'm sure. I'm here to talk about the next 20 years in technology. And I think counterintuitively, a lot of that is inevitable. And I use the word inevitable to mean that there's a leaning in technology, almost like gravity, that kind of pulls it in certain directions. There are recurring patterns that we see. And these recurring patterns are derived from the very nature of the elements that we're using, the wires and the switches and the chips. They produce these recurring effects. They're independent, often, of the politics or even our own preferences. And so these gravity kind of it makes us go in certain directions. It makes the technology lean in a certain way. And that leaning is what I want to talk about. The specific pattern that, say, water runs down a hill drawn by gravity is unpredictable. And so the specific forms, the larger forms are predictable, but the specifics of this, say, this variety of a quadruped are not predicted at all. Quadrupeds are sort of inevitable both biologically and in machine form, but a zebra is not. A particular one is not. Telephones. Any planet that had electricity is going to invent telephones. Telephones were inevitable. The iPhone was not. The internet, connection of all these phones together around the world, was inevitable. Twitter is not. So I want to talk about those larger forms that we have that are brewing now, that have been brewing for years and years, and that are going to move us forward. If we can understand the general leaning, the general gravity that's pulling in a certain direction, we'll have a tremendous advantage because we can embrace these technologies in order to steer them to the specifics that we want. So there are, I think, roughly a dozen of these long-term trends that are in process now, like decentralization, which will continue to go. Tracking, there's increasing tracking in our lives. There's increasing sharings as we make more and more technology that will allow us to collaborate at the scale of a planet, the kinds of things that Mark was just talking about. There's the switch from fixed entities that are nouns and products to things that are more like verbs and processes. That's continuing and will only increase into the future. But I want to talk about one of the ones I think, or two of the ones I think are perhaps most influential in the next 20 years. The first one I want to talk about is virtuality. There's a lot of talk at this conference about VR. And I think this is a really transformative process, at least at the 20-year scale. I think it's going to be a number of years before it becomes consumer So in the short term, it's a little bit overhyped, but in the long term, it's underhyped. And I want to talk about the effect that it's going to have and what we can kind of embrace in order to steer it. So the first thing I have to say about it is that I've been wrong before. So this is me on the right in 1989. Jaron Lanier, the guy who invented VR and used the word virtual reality, and he had a pair of goggles and gloves that I was trying on in 1989. It was a magical, amazing experience because I was in virtual reality. I had my hands. I could see we were more than one person. And I really felt, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything in 5 years. And I was wrong. What happened? Well, now we're talking about it again. And the VR that was back then was actually pretty good. What's changed? Well, what changed was back then, the technology to produce that cost in today's dollars about $1 million. It was about $1 million. The head tracking gear, all this stuff was incredibly expensive. What's changed since then is smartphones. The smartphones have become a commodity. They're just hundreds of dollars, maybe even cheaper. And there are elements in those that have been hijacked by VR. So the head tracking movements of the gyroscope and accelerometer in your phone are now been reduced to a tiny chip which can go into these goggles. The screens that we have in front of us, these high-res screens, now form the things inside that you look at. And the processor that does all the video processing is actually the little tiny chip that can also go inside. So it's very energy efficient, very lightweight, very small, very cheap. So now we have VR and we can talk about it because it's now a consumer level item, not $1 million. And this is proceeding rapidly enough based on the smartphone technology that I actually believe that this is the next platform after smartphones. Just to orient you, the kinds of things that you're seeing here today and you will see in the future, there's two basic kinds of VR. There's the immersive version, which is you put on a pair of goggles and you look around and you're in a different place. You feel like you're in a new place. It is nothing more than just seeing it, you actually feel it. There's a presence. The other version is the mixed reality, or AR, where you put on a pair of glasses that are clear and you can kind of see your room, you can see the office, but there are these virtual objects that are in front of you, or virtual screens. And that's mixed reality, or AR, and you have the sense of a presence, that they're really there. So there might be something on the stool or something, and I look around and I can actually walk around it and really see it, and it feels to me as if it's really there. That does work. If you have a chance to try it, you'll see. That mixed reality is being done by Microsoft, Meta, Magic Leap, and again, having that thing, you really do feel as if it's there. The resolution is without pixels. It really does seem to hover there. And you can actually use your hands and gestures to manipulate it, maybe explode it, to investigate it. So it's really going to be applied in teaching. It's going to be applied in making a virtual office. You have virtual screens that really do work. You can really read them. I watched the HD TV inside this apparatus, and it was completely visible. And you can manipulate things, so it's great for design and those kinds of applications, training, perfect. There are two kinds of, or two levels of VR today. There's the swivel, the Samsung, the stuff where you basically get to move around this way. That's your total degrees of freedom is very limited, and you can kind of get they call a VR movie experience. That's the cheaper version. The other version is where you're roaming. And so there you have the VR and you're kind of moving around. You have an entire room maybe that you're going through. And to do that requires sensors or cameras or other things in the whole room, which becomes much more complicated, much more expensive in that sense, trickier. But the experience is more of what we kind of associate with virtual reality, of being able to roam and move around. So the one is here, very easy to make. The second one is a little bit more advanced and a little bit more complicated to make. And so we've also discovered that a lot of the sense of being in VR has to do with the tactile, other than visual. So audio, hearing, and being able to reach and touch and feel things, maybe even things that are on your vest, on your chest, on your arms, your legs. And so our sense of being present is more than just what we see. It's a lot to do with the other senses. And I want to emphasize the fact that this is a felt experience. It's more than just what you see. There are lots of cool tricks that VR can do. One of the ones is called redirected walking, which means that if I turn 90 degrees, what I'm seeing may only turn 80 degrees. There's a 10-degree cheat, which you can accumulate and redirect me. So I think that I'm walking across the room, but in fact I'm just walking in circles. Okay, so I have this appearance that I'm exploring this world, but everything is happening in a very small room because I'm being redirected, nudged, manipulated even in some ways. And there's redirected touching where I think I'm grabbing different things, but actually I'm grabbing the same object again and again. It may even feel different. So there's lots of illusions and misdirections that are essential to it, in the same way that when we watch a movie, on a screen, we see something move, we see a spaceship move, we see a ball being thrown, and we would say that it is really moving, but in fact, of course, there's no motion at all. It's just a series of still pictures that our brain assembles and tells us is moving. In the same way, VR is dependent on the fact that our brain is assembling this sense of we are feeling that it's real. That assembly is not happening in the front of the brain, it's happening in the back of the brain. So that when the typical trick in VR is you're standing in a room like this, and suddenly the floor in front of you falls away 2 stories and you're on an edge. And your brain says, I'm just in the same room I was a minute ago, but the rest of your body is telling you to back up because you're going to die, and you feel it in a different part. And that feeling is what we're trading now in VR, that sense of an experience. There's telepresence, which is working pretty good. Microsoft demoed this telepresence, which is another person. And I have to say is that every hair of that person is moving. I can see every fabric in their clothes, every eyelash, and you do feel as if that person is there, even though you know that they're not. That feeling is paramount and overwhelms even your frontal knowledge. And that is a huge advance, I believe, in work, entertainment, is to have this other person there. And even those first-person games that you play now where you see the kind of gun in front of you, when you are in virtual reality, it's not something you observe, you're feeling it. When you leave it, you recall it as not something you have seen, but something you felt, something you experienced. And so this idea is where we're moving. The internet has been, so far, basically an internet of information, of knowledge, of things that you could look up or see, observe, encounter, know. And we're moving with VR to becoming an internet of experiences, where there are things that are felt, emotional, shared. So experiences are sort of going to be the new currency, and not just dramatic ones, but even experiences like having a person, even if they're virtual, share with you their presence, or seeing a demo or something. That is going to be the currency. That's what you're going to buy. You're going to buy experiences, download them, you're going to share them. And I think, in fact, VR will become basically the most social of all the social medias, because in my experience and others, nothing is as intriguing in these worlds as another person, and many more people. So it's not the objects that are cool, it's not the worlds, it's the fact that there are other beings that you're sharing these experiences with. So it's going to become a very, very social network, rather than this idea that people are isolated in their rooms with the goggles on. It will actually become one of the most social things that we do. This is high fidelity related to the Second Life platform, which is now becoming a virtual reality platform. And even though these are cartoon characters, each of those characters is actually looking like the person that's behind them. And more importantly, they move with the same body language, and they're using the same voice, and they have eye contact. And those three things turn out to be enough to convince you that that other being is really there and present. And so even though there are kind of not complete photorealistic, it turns out that you don't need that to actually have this social encounter that is happening already in places like these mutual collective social worlds. And I think that's where we're moving to, where we will spend a lot of time encountering others in this way that is available, and it makes experiences the central theme of the new network. By the way, VR works by tracking all your motions. They capture, in other words, you have to capture what you're doing. There's backward-facing cameras that can look at your expressions and relay that to the avatar so that those avatars have the same expressions that you have of perplexity or fear. And so anything that can be tracked is going to be tracked inside these worlds. And if our phones are surveillance devices that we pay for ourselves and carry with us, then VR is going to be surveillance worlds that we actually voluntarily enter into. And to do that, I mean, basically everything is being tracked inside VR. And so they're going to actually eventually accumulate huge amounts of data about us. Data that will actually be hard to track in real life are going to become fairly easy to track within VR. And so I think the companies with the most data will become some of the biggest companies, and I would expect some of the biggest companies to be the companies running these VR worlds. The second thing that I want to talk about, the trend, besides virtuality, interacting, is this trend to making things smarter. I call that to cognify. Cognification, cognifying. We don't have a good word in English. We don't say smartifying, smarting. So I would say cognifying, to make things smarter. It's another term for artificial intelligence. And AI in artificial intelligence is inevitable. Again, once you start to make logic circuits smaller and faster, you will have AI again and again. We have been making things smarter. Several things recently have accelerated that, so now we have AI that's good enough to improve. We have some sense of about Siri as kind of an AI. 50 years ago, Siri would be declared AI for sure. But now we have this language problem where once we get something working like that, we don't call it AI anymore. We call it machine learning, algorithms, just brute force. And we leave AI to be those things that are like us that machines can't do. So it's anything that we haven't achieved yet is basically AI. And so it's always receding into the future because there's always something else that we want AI to do before we call it AI. But setting aside those language hurdles, it's already here. It's already happening. It's already scanning in the back rooms. It's scanning X-rays better than human doctors. It's going through legal evidence better than a human paralawyer. And if you fly at all, you're being driven by an AI. The human pilots only fly 7 to 8 minutes on a transcontinental flight. So your brakes, there's a little tiny chip, smarter than you are, brakes better than you are, and that's why it's there. So in these ways, we have this kind of new thing, which is these three technologies, neural nets and the cheap GPUs in game cards and big data. We've made AI that is now rapidly improving. And something like IBM Watson has beat the Jeopardy championship, is now being retrained as a medical diagnosis system. It's very, very effective. That happens, all this stuff is happening right now today. And you've heard, of course, about AlphaGo beating the world's best Go master. What you might know is that there's Google AI, which can actually decipher what's happening inside a photograph. It can give you a caption in any language itself. It can look at the photograph, tell you what's there. And Google taught an AI how to learn to play a video game. If you've been playing video games for very long, you've been playing against AIs. But this AI is different. It actually learned how to play the game. So they showed it some games, looking at the screen, and it just learned how to play it like a human would, and it beat a human within a day. So we had artificial learning. I like to think of these things as examples as artificial smartness because they're very narrow. So your calculator is smarter than you are in arithmetic. GPS is smarter than you are in navigation, spatial navigation. Google and Bing are smarter than you are in recall. So these artificial smartnesses are very narrow. And the reason why we're putting an artificial smartness into a car is because that car is non-human-like thinking. It does not drive like a human. That's the whole point. It's not worried about whether it left the stove on, whether it should have majored in finance. It's just going to drive. It's engineered to be inhuman or non-human like that. And we might even advertise this as consciousness-free, as a feature. It's not going to be hung up on the internal machinations. It's actually just going to focus on driving. So our intelligence has a very poor understanding of what intelligence is. We don't really know. We tend to think of it as a single dimension, like a note getting louder. So at one end, there's kind of like a mouse or a rat, and then there's a chimpanzee, and then there's sort of stupid people, and then there's average people, and then there's genius people, and then there's an AI. And it's kind of like getting louder. It's like a single dimension. This is totally wrong. This is not what intelligence is. It is actually a much more of a symphony of different instruments of cognition, all of them thinking a little differently and having a different note. And that music, so to speak, is what we call intelligence or human intelligence. And so it varies a little bit person to person, but in particular, the strength of each kind of thinking, like deductive reasoning or spatial intelligence or emotional intelligence or social intelligence. These are all different modes of cognition that are combined together, aggregated in a codependent way. They're all helping each other, and that's what we call human intelligence. Animal intelligence is something very similar. It's a smaller set, and in some cases, some of those instruments actually may play louder than it does in ours, and they may be the same instruments, and some of them are a lot more quieter, so to speak. And so when we make an AI, we're doing the same thing of creating some of them with maybe the same instruments, but sometimes new notes as well. And they may be higher or stronger or superior to ours in some categories. That's where we get the specialized kinds of intelligence, like arithmetic. And so what we're really doing is actually making up many different kinds of minds, many different types or species of thinking. We're going to invent many different ways to solve problems, many new kinds of intelligences besides the kind that we have right now. And the reason why that's useful is because we can engineer them for particular purposes. And more importantly, they are kind of alien intelligences. They think differently than we do. And thinking different turns out to be the instrumental foundational skill in the new economy, is to think differently while being connected. It's actually not so hard to think differently if you're not connected to anybody else. It's very hard to think differently if you're connected to everybody else. So thinking different while connected is the chore, is the task. And we're going to use AIs to help us do that because they will have a different way of thinking. And they will be, in most cases, limited, narrow. Over time, we'll add more and more varieties of thinking and make some of them more complex. But they will all, in some senses, be composites that will think differently than we do, no matter how we arrange them. And that is a powerful idea that we are going to make as many different species of thinking as we can. So that thinking different is a feature, not a bug. The second important thing about the AI is that it's instrumental in launching a second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution, of course, came because we invented what I would call artificial power. Okay? Artificial power meaning we harness the machines, we harness steam power, coal power, wood power, fossil fuel, to do the kinds of things that our muscles and human and animal muscles had only done before. You can only go so far in what you can build and make with human and animal muscle. Artificial power to make roads, to make skyscrapers, to make factories, to make tractors, all these things running on this artificial power that built all that we see. So when we drive down the road and we turn the switch, we are actually harnessing 250 horses, 250 horsepower. We have the equivalent right there at the switch to do what we want to do, whether it's to speed down the highway or to build a room or to make a big long line of chairs, to move mountains, to do any of the things that we now produce and manufacture, requires this artificial power. And through that artificial power, we have this amazing result of civilization and cities that we live in today. So that automated power, that artificial power, we actually can then distribute with the electrical grid going out so that it would reach very easily any home, any farm, any factory, and you just would tap into that artificial power very easily just by plugging it in. And you could purchase as much of that artificial power as you wanted to as a commodity, as a utility. So that even like a farmer in the early part of last century could take something that was manual, that required manual energy like a water pump, and then moving up, down, he said, okay, I'll take X, I'll take something, I'll take a manual pump, and I'll add electricity that I purchase from the grid, and that gives me a electric pump. And that electric pump, multiplied by 1,000, hundreds of thousands of examples, was the Industrial Revolution. Take X, add electricity, you have something new that can do things that we couldn't even imagine before. And all the progress and the increase in the quality of life has come from that formula. Take X, add electricity, artificial power, and you have the Industrial Revolution. So what we're doing now is something very similar, which is we're going to take the electric pump and add AI and get the smart pump. Okay? We're going to take X and add AI. And so in addition to the car having 250 horses, now we're going to add 250 minds. And that 250 minds plus the 250 horses is the self-driving car. Okay, you add the AI to the artificially powered car and you have the self-driving automobile. And we're going to do that over and over again because we can access this commodity, this AI, like we have electricity. It will flow into the grid. We will be able to purchase it. You buy as much AI as you want. So on the cloud, you can get it, you can do it. And so what I would suggest is that the formula for the next 10,000 startups is very simple, which is take X and add AI. Take something that isn't smart today and add this as many minds as you want. What would you do if you had 1,000 minds that you could add to anything you wanted to? You'd have working for you day in, day out, every day of the year, doing something like having 250 horses at your disposal. Now you have as many minds of a different type, of different types as you want working on things. And so right now today, you can log on this very minute and you can actually buy this AI, which as an example, you can query it in a kind of a conversational way, asking it, what color dress does the girl have? What does she have in her hand? What color is the ball? You can have a conversation and it's giving you the right answers. That kind of AI is available from Google right now today for 6 cents, 100 hits. So that's already happening. You can purchase AI as a commodity, as a utility to do what you want. And the more people that use it, the smarter it gets. That's how it's being trained. You think you're just surfing on the web, but you're actually training AIs as you do. Each time you make a click, you're telling it that's important. Each time you search for something and you click on the answer, you're saying that is what is true. That's how these AIs are being trained. So the more people use it, the better it gets, the smarter it gets. The smarter it gets, the more people want to use it. So we have this network effects where it very quickly is getting much smarter. And recently, we're using AIs to train the next AIs. Facebook actually announced about 3 weeks ago that they were using an AI that they had developed to train their AIs. So that is another self-acceleration. All to suggest that this is going to go very, very fast. Whereas it seems maybe to be still limited, we're progressing very fast because of these self-accelerations. I actually think that by 2026, Google's main income will not be from advertising, but from selling AI in different capacities. If you take artificial intelligence and you put it into a body, you get a robot. These are the Tesla robots. They're building Tesla cars. And the thing about them is that they're all caged off, walled off from any kind of human because they will kill you if you're near it. They're unaware of anybody around them. They're so powerful, they'll have no sensors. But you can make robots like this one that is aware of humans. It can sense whether there's humans around. You can see whether it's looking at you or not. And more importantly, the way you train this one is you show it what you want to do, and it's watching you do it. So it can be actually programmed by even, say, illiterate people. Working online in a factory can show it what needs to be done, and it can learn. It also can learn by trial and error, by just repeating things and trying to get better and scoring itself until it successfully completes the job, and then it knows how to do things. That's happening right now. And so these kind of robots can work next to humans on in a garage or in a little factory somewhere. And that's important because this is where we're going to, is working with AIs and robots rather than against them. Robots will make new jobs. They invent new things for us to do. AI and automation in general has constantly enabled us to make new desires real. Things that we never even thought that we wanted. The reason why there are web designers today is that we invented the idea of a web that then needed designers. That was not in anybody's envisioning 200 years ago. So we're constantly using these AIs and bots to make up new roles and tasks that we want done, just as they are often replacing jobs that we've already been doing. So the most common occupation in America is actually truck driver. But I think in 20 years, for sure, 50% of those at least will be gone. Okay, so we have this need to replace those kinds of jobs with other kinds of things that we find that we want. The main thing is that those jobs that we currently have, including white-collar jobs, knowledge jobs, are going to go to the bots if they are at all concerned with efficiency. If you have a task at all that's defined by efficiency or productivity, that goes to the bots, because productivity is for the robots. Tasks where efficiency is not as important are the ones that we like to do. Science, innovation, art, human experiences. Science, by definition, is inherently inefficient. It's based on failure. Failure makes it go forward. Having things not work is how you learn. When you do innovation, you have dead ends. You have prototypes that don't work. You have all kinds of inefficient, ways in which to make things not work. That's how you learn. Art is by definition not very efficient. We don't rank Picasso on how many paintings per hour he's putting out. Human experiences are also inherently fundamentally inefficient. And so those are the kinds of things that we're actually pretty good at these days. And anything that where efficiency is required or expected will be something that goes to the bots. The other thing about the AIs is that we need to train them to be ethically superior than they are, and maybe even better than us. There's a trolley problem that's really real for auto-driven cars, which is if there's a crash, does the auto-driven car head to the barrier and maybe injure the passenger, or head into the traffic with pedestrians and maybe injure some pedestrians? Should a car company be able to sell a car saying, we will give priority to the safety of the passenger? Is that ethically correct? So those are the kinds of problems that actually ethicists are working on, roboticists, Google, among many others, are kind of working to bring those things in, those attributes into the AIs. And in the process, we discovered that humans are actually not very good at this ourselves. We're not actually very ethically consistent or deep. And trying to train an AI to do that, because we give ourselves a pass. Whenever we have an accident, we're not required, so to speak, to actually justify our decision because we say it was instinct, we didn't have time to think. But the AIs have time to think because beforehand we have to program that. So we actually are going to be learn to become better ethically as we try and teach AIs and robots how to do these things. Is it okay to give priority to the passenger? When Kasparov, the great chess player, lost to Deep Blue, the first thing he did was he actually made a new league of chess where he could play with the huge database that the AI had. He said it's unfair that the AI has access to every chess move that has ever been done. If I had access to the same thing, I would have won. Let's make a chess league where you can play as an AI, with an AI, or against an AI. Kind of like a free martial art. And so he invented this idea of a centaur, which is this idea that you team with an AI. And today, the best chess player in the world is actually not a human, it's not an AI, it's a team of humans and AI. The best medical diagnosis in the world is not in Watson, it's not a human doctor, it's the team. And so this idea of working with these other intelligences, particularly as they complement us, is sort of where we're going. I think you're going to be paid by how well you work with AIs. Whether you have a facility, whether you are in some ways understand how they think, some are even capable of working with others that think differently than you do. In general, the message is that we're going to be working with these rather than against them. So let me just say a few things about where we're going in general. I'm suggesting that we embrace these technologies because through their embrace, we actually get to steer them. If we try to prohibit them, stop them, reduce them, we don't actually get to steer or manage them. The specifics. These long-term trends are going to happen whatever we do, and so we are interested in the specifics, and those are not predictable. Those we have a lot of choice about. Those make a huge difference to us. But we only get to those by using these technologies and engaging them. And so as we go into the future, it's hard to say anything about the specifics because they are unpredictable. But there's several things that I've learned about it. One is that it's very hard to believe what will happen. I still find Wikipedia almost impossible to believe, right? Because in theory it should not work. And the fact that it does work so well has actually led me to kind of believe in the impossible more often. We've been talking about computers becoming so cheap and small over the years. 20 years ago, when they were still big units, we were saying someday computers would be so cheap, so small, you'd put them into every object. You'd put them into shoes, you'd put them into your shirt, you'd put them into a door. And people thought that was ridiculous. Why would you ever, a computer in a door, why does that make any sense at all? Well, you can't go into a hotel today without interacting with the computer in the door. That's just how it goes. So that impossible thing is a lot more likely. I think we just have to open our minds to believe these impossible things, which often happen, the fact that we're now collaborating at a new level with billions of people at the planetary scale in real time. And we're just really at the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. We're day one. We've just begun. When the people look back on now, they will say, you didn't even have the internet back then, compared to what we're going to have in 20 years. There are no experts in AR, VR. There's lots of people working on it. There's billions of dollars being spent on it. They're smart people, but there are no experts. Nobody knows how this is really done. I think the greatest invention today might have been the web. But 30 years ago, I would not have mentioned it because it didn't exist. It's very likely that as we go into the future in 2040, that the most important technology may not be AI or VR. It may be something that has not yet been invented at all. That means you're not late. So thank you.
Many thanks. Kevin Kelly from Wired Magazine, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic to have you here, Kevin, and thank you to PhD and Mark Holden for making that possible. A short break now. Upstairs in the forum room, the Edelman